The following pre-recorded program is sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts. Welcome to About Money, a different approach to investing you won't hear anywhere else. Your hosts, the AFC team, Mike and Al, are registered investment advisors who have a proven track record of managing long-term investments surpassing the markets. The information shared on the following program is for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. And now, here's your AFC team, Mike and Al.
Good afternoon. It's Saturday and we're talking about money. Good afternoon, Mike.
Good afternoon.
Mike, I want to start off by talking about the fertility rate.
I think that's a pregnant thing to talk about.
It's really interesting what's going on. We've known for a while that the fertility rate was dropping in the Western world, but something strange has happened recently. It's been dropping in the non-West, in non-developed countries of seeing their rates drop, even in Africa. Don't get me wrong, it's not going to drop off the cliff anytime soon, but it's been dropping precipitously, and it has long-lasting consequences to the world economy that I don't think a lot of people are taking into consideration. You know, let's go back, because the population started to take off somewhere around mid-1800s. Mm-hmm. But there was a guy by the name of, you've brought him up before, Thomas Malthus. Remember him? He was
I've talked about him a number of times.
Yeah, he was probably a barrel of laughs to talk to, huh? But his theory was that there's going to be mass starvation because food production would not keep up with population.
Correct.
Boy, was he wrong. Food population blows away. We could feed all 8 billion people, no problem. Now, not to say that Africa and India don't have their droughts and problems with feeding people because of those issues. But if we factored out politics and borders, and there's plenty of food to go around the world a couple of different times.
But remember, Malthus was the end of the 1700s, 1800s. They didn't have tractors. They didn't have combines. They didn't have milking machines.
But he couldn't see around the corner and see, oh, wait a second, maybe something will... Because he was late 1800s, dawn of the electricity and things like that. He couldn't see that around the corner, that maybe something was coming that, technology going to save the day.
Yes.
But this has long-lasting implications to the economy. Think about pension rate. Pensions depend on workers coming up. It used to be from about so there were, from 1975 to 2008, there were 3.2 to 3.4 workers for each retiree. Since 2009, this is just in the United States, that ratio has dropped off, and it's dropped down to where there are only 2.8 workers, and it's going down.
I think a lot of people have a misconception about what Social Security is. Mm-hmm. Social Security is something where I think if I pay into Social Security, I get the money back out. But that's not the way it works. Al, you're paying for part of my Social Security.
I know. What's
deducted from your paychecks goes to pay part of the Social Security that I'm drawing. So it's the workers who are actually funding the retirees.
Right. And how did they come up with the age in 1935, Franklin Delano Roosevelt? They came up with age 65.
Because people didn't live much beyond 65.
But that's not how they came up with it.
I didn't know.
They came up with it because they got these actuaries to study. People thought it came from Europe, from Germany, because Germany started the first pension system somewhere in the 80s. And the guy that started at the time they believed was 65, and said, oh, let's make it till 65. Well, that's bogus. That's not true. They got these actuaries, and they studied a couple companies that had pension plans. And the average age that they had their pensions at was 65 and 70. Well, the actuaries thought 70 was too long, and they thought 65 was good age. Settled on the average life expectancy in 1935, 60.7. 1940, 62 years. It didn't reach 65 till 1945. And what were we coming out of in 1945?
World War II.
Yeah. So how is this system going to pay out, right? They figured the incremental growth in the people, and people didn't live that long. You're going to pay out. If you make it, how long are you going to live? 2, 3 years? We give him a couple bucks and he's gone.
When my father was getting ready to retire in 78, one of the options he worked for Pacific Gas and Electric. One of the options he had was a 5-year annuity. So his entire thing would be paid out in 5 years and be done.
Yeah.
Because most people at 65, when they retired in 1978, did not live to see the end of their annuity.
Right. What was the average Boeing guy? He retired and died within 5 years.
Yep.
But that's when Social Security, after a couple of years, I think it was 37 or 38, they added a survivor benefit for the wife. Mm-hmm. And so that's why they did those things, because okay, this guy's not going to live, but the women still live longer, so we're going to get something, give her something. But let's throttle this back and take it back to younger people, the implications that this has. Because what do we see going on? Like where I grew up, Mike, about 5 miles south of Boston, there was something came out when I think I was maybe 10. It was called Proposition 2.5. And what they did is they cut all the school. They had huge cuts to schooling because they saw there wasn't enough kids joining. So let's get rid of this school and combine it with this school and save money and combine it with that school. And we see that still going on now. And we see even, I've heard colleges are starting to say, hey, wait a second, there's other reasons why kids aren't going to college. But do you see colleges starting to say, wait a second, where are the kids going to come from that are going to go to college? Where's the money going to come from?
It's a critical issue.
And then, one thing that is seen in the world, this is worldwide for the most respect, maybe except for a few, maybe except for Africa, but the replacement, we need 2.1 people to replace the people that have died. That's dropped. We're below 2.1. The most egregious countries are Italy and Japan.
They're below 1.
And you have countries there, Italy and Japan, where they have more people in adult diapers than baby diapers. And Italy is taking out ads in the news to try to get people to have more babies. Singapore tried this. They tried it with tax deductions. They tried it with free daycare and all that stuff, right? To no avail. They can't get women to go back and have more babies.
About 8 or 9 years ago, the government of Denmark came out with a series of ads encouraging the Danish people to take a vacation and have a lot of fun and come home pregnant.
Well, and a lot of people thought, oh, COVID's the perfect baby boom. We didn't see it. We saw a boom in dogs and cats, but not babies. But here's the other startling, is that people assume this is just women want to go to the workforce, get more education, and don't want to strap, they want careers. But they see this happening with women who are with less education, who don't have the advanced degrees. They see them with modest education saying the same thing. And that's a new phenomenon that we're seeing change in the demographic. And the implications of this is like young people have what's called, it's a type of intelligence that young people possess where they're psychologists, I can't find the term they call it, but they're more apt to be more mendable in certain things, develop critical technology. As you get older, they notice that these things taper off. Not in a bad way, it's just what happened. And the implications of this is that when these two economists look at patents that were being developed, and they saw patents being developed that in their 20s, 30s, they go up, in their 40s or mid-40s, they peak, and they start to come down. And the patents that are later developed in older people are incremental. They're not these groundbreaking or what we call disruptive technology. See, those are coming from younger minds, people thinking, really thinking through a lot of these things and seeing the changes they want to make. Now, in Japan, it's really interesting because they were the leader in patents for years. Japan blew everybody away, okay? But their population is aging so fast. You have so many older people and not enough young people that they've seen their patents drop off. They used to be ahead of China and Japan. Now, China and the USA, now they've dropped below both.
So the issue that you're really saying is the incredible improvements we've seen in technology are also going to be affected by the demographics as we get older and fewer replacements and fewer young people. The technology progress we make could very well slow down.
Yes, could. Everybody's talking about AI. Why are they talking about it? This is one of the reasons. If we need this type of learning that could learn better than we do at some point, it could be at a point where we need it. And everybody wants to hammer immigration. Well, immigration will come and save the day. Well, contrary to what all the politicians are saying on both sides about immigration, we have the Western world has immigrated more people. They have done more immigration to the wealthier countries than they've ever done. We've taken in more. Europe's taken in more immigrants, and so that's not going to solve the problem because those countries, as I said, are having the same deceleration in fertility, and that's where the world is going.
And even with those who are well educated, a couple decades ago, when somebody came from a third world country and was educated at one of our universities, there was a tendency for them to stay in the United States.
Yeah.
Not anymore. Most of those students are returning to their home country. So even that, in terms of helping the United States, has dwindled down. It's an issue.
And we've talked about a lot about this, the 70s and 60s with inflation. We're in an inflationary period right now. Well, how is that going to work its way through? Where the 70s and 60s were different, if you look at the demographic, at the bottom of the pyramid, there was a ton more younger people at the time. Right now, we don't have, and there's two ways to look at it. Some economists and people researching this think that, well, that's going to cause, disinflation, and the inflation rate's going to go down, and we're going to be left with, very low interest rates, which is changes has its impact. We'll pick this up when we come back. We'll talk more about this.
It's a big, big issue. Don't go away.
About Money with Mike Adams on AM 1300 The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money with your AFC team, Mike and Al, on AM 1300 The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
So, Al, we've been talking about this change in fertility rates. At Adams Financial Concepts, a lot of our investment philosophy revolves around changes in technology, lifestyles, and demographics. This is one of the largest demographic changes we're going to see.
This is a sea change in demographics.
It
really
is.
And if you're not picking up on this, it's going to cause drastic changes to the world, which, all economies, even our economy, we can isolate ourselves, but only so much. I mean, just look at other things like, how it's going to affect, like we've seen maternity wards closing in hospitals. There's a shortage of maternity wards.
Yeah.
And then healthcare spending is going to skyrocket because we're going to have so many older people.
And when you really think about it and think about the fact that there's going to be fewer and fewer workers to support the retirees, and we're living longer and longer, that puts a tremendous burden on the economics or the federal government.
It does.
Our government, every other government in economies, because more and more of the spending by federal governments is going to have to support retirees.
And that means higher tax rates coming down the road. There's no two ways around it. We have $30 trillion in debt, and there's a book I've mentioned before called the Demographic Cliff by Harry Dent. And actually, I went back and read. I owe Harry an apology. Actually, his book's pretty good, Harry. I guess I must have, when I read it 10 years ago, whenever 7 or 8 years ago, I must have not read thoroughly. He makes a lot of good points. He pointed out that by 2021 we're going to be $30 trillion in debt. He was a couple of years off. He makes some outlandish things that the Dow in 2014 and 15 was going to be at 3,300. Well, it's at 33,000. Missed that by a little. But some of the things he says were right on. He picks on talking about Japan and their problems and the problems that they were supposed to overtake the United States in the 80s. Remember that Japan in the 80s economy was gangbusters.
Yeah.
But because of, demographics and things, they never made any structural changes to their economy when they had all those problems. This is a situation they're in.
And it does not seem like many governments are really dealing realistically with it. If you talk about our own government, the Biden administration, the last we signed the debt ceiling deal, they wanted to keep Social Security exactly the same way as the Medicare, the same as it was. But the points you made in the first part of the program, that we have fewer and fewer workers to support the retirees, we have to deal with that at one time or another.
And Mike, there's a psychological, and the psychological effect is this. As we have these aging society, the younger people become more risk averse. They're not starting businesses. They're not going out and taking that risk that we're taking. That if you look at, and one other point I'll make in a second is that going out and borrowing money, that stimulates the economy, stimulates growth. Mm-hmm. People not doing that, willing to take those risks is an issue.
And that's going to continue. You mentioned Malthus earlier.
Yeah.
And Malthus had the idea that wars were a good thing because it killed off people. And his point was that women should get married and start having children, or shouldn't get married and shouldn't have children because children only add to the population growth. And in a lot of ways, what we're saying about the demographics, Malthus may have a point.
Yeah. But, what I said about younger people what the term I was looking for, psychologists call this for young people, is called fluid intelligence. Mm-hmm. It's a creative thinking to solve problems in a different way. As we get older, it gets more stagnant. That's where we'll make the incremental changes, but we're not going to go way out on the edge there to try to solve problems. But that's just where entrepreneurship and inventions come from, is people that want to really go way out there and take that risk. But if we don't have those people coming up to take that risk, where does that leave the economy? Where does that leave humanity?
Yeah, this has very far-reaching consequences. And it's like the old thing about the frog in the water.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Drop a frog into boiling water and it'll jump out.
Yep.
Drop it into cold water and slowly heat the water until it boils.
Yep.
The frog just sits there.
Yeah.
That's the kind of situation we're almost in.
Right. And so, and they bring this to the political sphere. When we have aging older politicians, it's the same thing. They don't want to take risk. They're more risk averse, and so they don't see they're not going to see they're not going to be the beneficiaries of the growth.
Mm-hmm.
So, the Dianne Feinsteins who are 90 and the Joe Bidens who are, 80 and Trump who's 80, they're not going to be the beneficiaries of the growth. So this is a part of the problem. So I don't know what the solution is, but countries trying to put pro fertility policies in place, it hasn't worked. And the other thing is technologically, people thought, oh wait, technology will save the day because if a woman wants to go get a master's or PhD and have a baby later on, she can do it. Artificial insemination only works 50% of the It's a 50% success. That's not a high success.
So, what it means is the world is going to change, and we need to look for investments which take advantage of it.
Yes.
That's what it really means for us. Because, Joe Biden doesn't call me and say, what should we do about this? Macron didn't call me and say, what should we do about that in France? So it's one of those issues we have to recognize as an issue and a problem, but it's going to be to the politicians and to the leaders that are going to have to face it and solve it. Our part in that is to find those investments which will do well because of that, or in spite of that.
And that's why there's such this push to AI. That's why everybody's so hot on it, because of this robotics and AI to pick up the slack for a while to see, if this trend turns. But at some point, the world is going to hit a peak of fertility, and then it's going to start to decline. And the irony, Mike, is there's a lot of people out there that are somewhat Malthusian and are cheering this on. A lot of environmentalists saying, "Oh yeah, this is great. We don't need any more people." But contrary to what they think, the Earth can support plenty more people, no problem. It's not a problem where to put people. That's not an issue. But they haven't thought of the consequences of not having enough young people coming up. That hasn't been thought through. The environmentalists see, more people, more waste, more building, more this, more pollution. But they never thought of the consequences of what are we going to do when we don't have enough, which is even a bigger issue.
It is going to be a big issue.
Because I think technology will come and save the day as far as pollution and climate change and do that. But getting people to have babies, I don't know how you're going to figure that one out.
That's
so
what an issue
it is.
At a time when we're dealing with increasing military budgets, we're not dealing with the aging problem at all.
No.
So I know there was a time maybe 8 or 10 years ago when Japan realized they were going to have a shortage of 4 million healthcare workers for their elderly, and they did actually start to subsidize robotics.
Yeah.
And for a long time, Japan was the leading country for robotic. And you look at some of the robots, they're not far from R2-D2
or
C-3PO.
No, we're going to see
more
of that.
They have a little cuddly robot that'll talk to you.
I told you about that one in the commercial I saw. I can't think of the name of it. For a little kid. But, the other effects is like, what's it going to have in the real estate market? Right now, we have a housing shortage. But if we get to peak housing, we get to that, how is it going to affect the real estate? It affects everything. This affects everything. There isn't anything this doesn't touch.
It affects food. It affects real estate. It affects
the stock market.
It affects the number of cars. It affects the number of planes. It affects everything that we do. And when nobody's talking about it, when nobody is willing to deal with it, it creates some opportunities for investment, but they'll only become better and sharper types of investment.
But, everybody thought that, a lot of people thought that, what China was going to save the day is growth, worldwide growth, as they come out of COVID. But they're having their problem with age, their aging problem is so bad that it's their elderly is the size of the whole United. You put that 339 million in the United States. They have 339 million people that are aged out of the work that they got to try to, and they don't have it. And their fertility rate is way down, below 1, I think. It's really down.
Which is really interesting because they went into the one-child policy, and at the time they did the one-child policy, the average life expectancy was 65. Now their population is growing much faster, and they did away with the one-child policy, but in fact the number of births has not increased much at all. So they have an issue that they will reach not long after Japan on a one-to-one basis, one worker per retiree.
Yeah, and that's not a sustainable basis. That's not sustainable at all. That's a collapsing economy.
Either you reduce what retirees get, or you increase what workers get,
yeah,
or the reality is you move the retirement age by a lot.
Yeah,
maybe retire at 75 or 80 years old instead of 67.
But I mentioned this in a previous show, but is the fertility rate dropping in Nigeria and Africa? That to me is fascinating because even though they still have the traditional shape, a pyramid, it's amazing that they're seeing precipitous drop in that content.
Yeah, and so, a very poverty-stricken continent.
Yeah.
So anyway, all that to say, there will be investment opportunities, and we will sure be looking at those because that's what we do for our clients. We're coming to a commercial break. Don't go away. I want to talk when we come back about a conference. I was at one of the panelists at the 7th Annual Private Wealth Northern California Forum. I've got some things to say about that right after this break.
About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's your AFC team, Mike and Al.
So, the group that runs the private wealth forums reached out to me. The one for California reached out to me. I was surprised that I was asked to be on a panel about what's the future of fixed income. I thought it would be more about stocks, but it was about fixed income. It was a forum where they had one panel that talked about the next 12 months at a glance. They had a panel that talked about the lower middle market investing, a panel that talked about alternatives, a panel that talked about real estate, a panel that's talked about the equity equation, evaluating the impact on portfolios. Essentially the equity premium, what stocks are paying more than bonds. And then they had a thing on, I didn't even write down what my panel was. Fixed income. What's going on and what do you do? Now, there were 4 of us on the panel and a moderator. 2 on the panel were managing multi-billion-dollar funds. The Man Group, which was represented by one person, manages $144 billion. It's a 150 or 160-year-old company out of the UK. They were there to talk. The manager for the fixed income, all fixed income for American Century, does all the mutual funds for American Century. He was there, multi-billions of dollars in fixed income. There was another advisor. Her firm manages several $100 million, and me. So there were like 2 of us from the retail side and 2 from the institutional side. And the moderator had been from the institutional side. So as we went down, there was a little bit of background on who we were, a little background on what was going on in the bond markets. And the first really serious question was, the moderator said, the 10-year Treasury is right now, as of Tuesday was trading at 3.7%. And he asked the 4 of us, what are your projections for where the 10-year Treasury will trade in 6 months or 12 months? And Darcy Smoot was the first answer, and she mentioned that she felt it was going to trade at 3.2% down. And that fit with a lot of what people were saying is we're headed for a recession, which I disagreed with. I'll tell you more about that as we go on. I was the second to talk, and I said, I can't tell you what 6 months will be, but my best estimate for where we are on the 10-year Treasury is not down, but above 5%. Which got some shocked responses from the audience, and there were probably 100, 150 people there. The guy next to me, listening to the 2 of us, said, I don't like to make projections, and I don't know. And I guess maybe the same. That was the guy from the Man Group. The guy from American Century Investments said, I think 3.2% is probably a good estimate. It could be 3%. So since I was really the outlier, the moderator said, so explain why you think rates are going to be at 5%. And I said, there's a number of reasons. Number one, we're dealing with inflation, and inflation is sticky. For the people here who think that the Fed is going to lower rates by the end of the year, and there's not a lot, but they're expecting rates to go down in 2024, I said there's a real issue because this is not an inflation like we've seen before. We have going on right now, we have almost 6 million jobs that are going unfilled because we don't have enough workers to fill those jobs. So that's the first point. The second point is that the Fed is deleveraging their balance sheet. They're going to be selling $1 trillion worth of bonds. They're not replacing those. They're just going to deleverage their balance sheet, and at the current rate, they're going to get rid of $1 trillion of bonds. So they're dumping in the market. You have one big seller right there, and you know that's going to happen. The third reason is wars are fought very slowly, but they're won very quickly. My guess is that the war in the Ukraine will be over in 12 months, and that issue is going to go away. And the fourth issue is one about which people have been talking about in this conference, because they had a number of money managers that were managing multi-billion-dollar portfolios of stocks. And I'll talk more about that. But what they had to say is we're expecting a recession, either a soft recession or a hard recession. And when we saw a 2% drop in GDP in the dot-com time, the market went down 50%. When we saw 2008, when the GDP wasn't down that much, we saw a drop of 50%. Actually, it was 37, but that's close enough. So they were saying we're 15 to 20% to 30% to 50% in cash. And I said, if you begin to go have inflation shrink, if you begin to have the Fed selling bonds, what we've got right now going on, when you have people talking about being 15 or 20 or 40 or 50% in cash, there's a flight to quality. It's a traditional typical thing to do is when you get scared, you sell your stocks and you buy bonds. So what happens when the fear goes away? You sell your bonds and you buy stocks. I said, that's the fourth reason is what we've been listening to here. When that war ends, when we're starting to see a real drop in the inflation rate, they're going to sell their bonds and buy cash and buy stocks. I said, that puts another group of big sellers. And don't forget, the Fed is deleveraging, but the Treasury has $1.5 trillion of notes that they have to refinance. So you add $1 trillion from the Fed, $1.5 trillion from Treasury, and you add all the portfolio managers that are scared. The fear of looking stupid, I call. They're going to be selling their bonds. I said all of that puts tremendous sales pressure on the Treasury. And what I expect is you'll see that the curve uninverts and Treasury rates above 5. So that got a lot of thought. I had a few discussions after the panel. But really the reason to think that rates are going to go lower is to assume that the Fed is going to be successful in handling inflation, that we're going to have a recession. And there are some signs that there are some weakness in the economy. The Purchasing Managers Index for manufacturing is below 50, which means manufacturing is slowing down. House prices have been dropping, and the number of homes that are being sold has dropped by 30%? There's a number of things that are showing that the parts of the economy are really slowing down. On the other hand, when you look at it, I talked to my travel agent because we're booking a trip, and she said she's never, ever been busy, and she's been in the business for 4 decades. She said, everybody is traveling and wants to travel. We saw car sales go off the charts until everybody had a car, and then they dropped the other way. It's a time in which there is so much confusion because we've never seen a period like this before. I got a chance to add to what I was saying in another question. I said, if you look back, I think it was Mark Twain who said, history doesn't rhyme, that it repeats.
It doesn't repeat, it rhymes.
I'm sorry. Doesn't repeat, it rhymes. Okay, I get it. Thanks, Al. I said, if you look back in the 1960s and 70s, we started seeing inflation in the 60s. At the beginning of the 60s, we had 1% inflation. By the mid-60s, it was up to 6 or 7%. William McChesney Martin at the time was the head of the Fed, and he began to raise rates. And because he was raising rates and doing what classically was done, we began to tumble into a recession so well advanced that when Nixon was running for re-election in 1972, he was worried that the economy was going to be into a recession and he was not going to get reelected. And so instead of reappointing Martin, who had been appointed first by Truman, then Eisenhower, then Kennedy, then Johnson, instead of reappointing him, Nixon appointed Arthur Burns. And Burns was an expert on the business cycle, saw the recession taking place, saw that inflation was coming down, and so he began to lower interest rates. And all of that probably would have worked, in my opinion. That probably would have gotten rid of the recession and gotten rid of inflation, except you had a geopolitical event that happened. You had the Shah of Iran, who wanted to buy more military equipment, and as part of OPEC, he talked OPEC into increasing oil prices by at least 15%, and when there was pushback on that, they did the oil embargo. And that, of course, oil was such a key factor. Our per capita consumption of oil in 1972 is the highest it's ever been per capita, amount of oil per person. The oil embargo sent prices soaring, and you know the story. Inflation reached double digits. Interest rates under Volcker had to increase very significantly. I said the risk today is not that the Fed is successful and slowly brings down rates, but at some time in the future, there could be a geopolitical event. What could it be? It could be any number of things. A nuclear attack, a terrorist attack. The Fed is looking at 15 different, or the government, the federal emergency is looking at 15 different potential upsets, including a pandemic. But that's where we were. I have a couple more things to say about that forum. I think it was very good. I think there's always an exchange of ideas that goes on, and no one's ever 100% right.
About Money with the AFC team, Mike and Al on AM 1300, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
So I've been talking about the 7th Annual Private Wealth Northern California Forum, and the whole thing started off, what are going to be the next 12 months at a glance in the market? And I think one of the things that came out was the focus on commercial real estate. They said regional banks are not out of the woods. 2/3 of commercial real estate is financed by regional banks. And if you look at what's happened in the work at home environment, so many offices are empty. You know, when you listen to that, and that's not just something that was said at the forum, you read about that in the paper all the time. Regional banks are really in struggle. 38% or 2/3 of all commercial real estate by regional banks. And so
the other thing I'm hearing about is credit card debt
well,
rising.
Yeah.
And not only just for big purchases, but for they see everyday items going on credit card.
But let me come back to real estate.
Go back. Let's talk about real estate.
I want to talk about that.
We can talk about that in the shadow banking industry. Right?
Okay. But on real estate, the reality is that 2/3 of commercial real estate is by regional banks, and values are plummeting in certain parts of the real estate, especially in the office market. But only 12% of regional bank loans are commercial real estate. So they own a lot of the commercial real estate, but 88% of their loans are not real estate loans. And if you look at the office real estate as part of regional banks' portfolio, it's 5%. So when people say 2/3 of the commercial real estate is by regional banks and they're in trouble, and there may be some regional banks that are in trouble, but it's not a pervasive thing throughout the industry.
I think it was a couple banks that had all the most of the real estate from what I read. There's a few banks that are holding most, not all regional banks. There's a couple banks, I can't think of the name of them, but I read about one of them in Manhattan that's holding a
huge
ton of Manhattan real estate, commercial real estate, like 40 or 50% of some ridiculous number that is in serious trouble.
Yeah, and those banks are going to be in serious trouble.
Yeah.
But most banks do not have more than a few percentage points in office real estate. And there's no question. There was, when they talked about real estate, the group that talked about real estate talked about what's going on in the office market. And what they're seeing is the A and AA and AAA type buildings, rents are increasing. It's the B and C properties which are suffering the worst. Those are the ones which will really face bankruptcy and face default. But the A-rated buildings seem to be doing okay.
But there'll always be somebody out there who's an investor who's sitting on money, that will snap up this when they see it at a 75 cents to 60 cents on the dollar.
Or 40 cents.
Or 40 cents. Yeah. This guy, I know them. I know a lot of real estate people, and they'll be like this. Some of them are sitting on cash right now, just salivating, waiting for profit to go on sale.
Yep.
And they're sitting there waiting. I know them well, and they're like, yep, we're just waiting for the shoe to drop. And they're going to come in and snap that real estate for pennies on the...
And the banks with a small portion of that real estate are going to be more than willing to drop that and let somebody take it off their hands. Mm-hmm. Non-performing loan, they'll get rid of the loan, they get rid of the real estate and shuffle it off. That's a positive thing.
Yeah, and the other thing, Mike, is that a lot of what I've read about is that the banks are not going to do like in 2008 and just sort of, we're not in that type of situation. And so what they're going to do is they're going to a lot of these are going to be renegotiated. Well, your rate is this and the loan is this long. Well, let's renegotiate the loan so we don't have a default, and we'll go out this long and we'll lower your rate to this, and we'll negotiate, figure something out. I think a lot of that is probably going on right now.
And some people are going to be asked to put up more collateral. They're going to be asked to enrich what they put up in the first place. That's going to happen. So what you say is true. There are going to be a number that are renegotiated. Terms are going to be changed. But the comment of the regional banking system is in huge trouble and it's gonna fall over and we're gonna have another banking crisis. No, statistically it's not there. But it's that fear that sells.
But Mike, the United States has more bank than any other industrialized country per capita. Mm-hmm. There's 4,000. There used to be in the 80s, there was 14,000. And we've whittled that down to about 4,000. And we see the consolidation going on with Chase buying First Republic. First Republic, thank you. And so I think we're going to see a lot more consolidation. I think that's going to continue. We're going to whittle it down to another number. But I don't think we're going to see the problems that we saw like in 2008. I don't think we're near that.
Well, and what we're seeing internationally is instead of banks, what we're seeing is the automatic payments, the FinTel, the financial technology that's replacing banks overseas. And we're going to see more of that here
Look
as well.
Look at Apple. They basically want to become their own bank, right?
Yeah.
So
I mean, anyway, I thought that was something which, when people talked about it, it was a great fear. I don't see it as a great fear. The statistics just don't stack up. I thought it was interesting. One of the speakers at the equity equation talking about the equity premium. The equity premium is the expected value of what stocks do versus bonds. So if bonds are at 3.7 now, the 10-year Treasury is at 3.7, a normal premium would be 3 to 4%. So stocks achieving 6 or 7% is 7 or 8% is a normal equity premium. And they were talking about the equity premium shrinking. Now, if interest rates, if the interest rate on the 10-year Treasury is coming down and the premium shrinking, they're looking for the value of the stock market to come down. One of the speakers was Noble. I can't remember his first name. Out of one that I talk about, Northern Trust. Northern Trust is forecasting that the Standard & Poor's in 12 months will be 4108. I've talked about them in the past because they consistently have predicted, as they do their annual report, that the stock market's going to be up 6%. 6% in 2021, 6% in 2022, 6% in 2020. They're consistent. So this is a real change. They're forecasting now that it's going to be down.
But all the technical indicators, 4,200 was their resistance, and it's broken through. I don't know what ended it at today, but all the technical indicators is saying that it's going to keep moving higher.
Morris, nope. Lily Taft from Main Street Research, managing billions of dollars, said that the real issue is that the whole stock market is being driven up by a few very large names.
That is an issue, though, this narrow recovery is a problem.
But if you look at it, it is an issue because it's a few names, and the few names really stand out, and those few names are being bought by the big firms. But that's not atypical. First Boston did a study that showed that 330 companies in the Standard & Poor's on the average underperform and lose money and drop out of the S&P 500 because they lose money. So that means that it's a few stocks in the S&P which really carry things up. We don't own any of those big names, and yet our portfolios are outperforming the S&P 500.
I was just listening this morning. They were talking about that you can outpace the market without owning those big names.
But you have to be in front of the curve.
Yes.
You have to realize what's going on in demographics.
Yes, that's right.
You have to be aware of what's happening with a lower fertility rate. And then you have to think about lower fertility rate. How is that going to impact what companies are doing and where they are? That's where we are. That wraps it up. Anyway, we will be back next Saturday to talk about money. Have a very good week and a good weekend. We're almost halfway through this year.
Have a good weekend, Mike.
You've been listening to About Money with registered investment advisors Mike Adams and Al Souza. If you'd like more information about what you've heard today or about AFC's investment philosophy and strategy, or if you'd like the AFC team to evaluate your own portfolio, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com. The information shared in the preceding program was for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. Join us again next Saturday at noon for more About Money with Mike Adams here on AM 1300, The Answer. The preceding program was sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts.